My name is Elena Grace, and I'm 62 years old. 15 years ago, I worked as a housemaid in the Whitmore Mansion on Belcrest Hill. Today, I walked through those same iron gates again, not with a mop and a bucket, but with a contract in my hand. I was there to rent the place. The same house where I once polished floors for a living will soon be my photo studio. The real estate agent almost dropped her clipboard when she heard me say it. "Wait, you used to work here?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes. I cleaned every corner of this house. Now I'm here to capture it from behind a camera." She smiled politely, but I could tell she didn't believe me. People rarely do. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Lemon wax, old wood, and a trace of the rain leaking through the roof. It was the same smell from the night everything ended. My shoes clicked against the marble, echoing in the emptiness. The house hadn't changed, but I had. In the living room, a glass case hung on the wall. Inside it, of all things, was a bronze key. My key. The one I used to wear on my belt when I worked here. It opened every door in the mansion except one, the master's office. The night they fired me, they took it away. I never thought I'd see it again. I stood there for a long moment, staring at it. It wasn't just a piece of metal to me. It was the sound of early mornings, the weight at my hip, the proof that I was trusted once. Or at least, that I thought I was. "Do you want to start the tour?" the agent asked gently. "Go ahead," I said. "I just need a second." I brushed my hand against the banister. The wood was smoother now, polished by a different pair of hands. The chandelier above still swayed slightly when the wind pushed through the hall. That sound used to make me flinch, afraid I'd be blamed for breaking something expensive. 15 years ago, I lived in fear of this house. Every glass, every vase, every misplaced cushion felt like a test I might fail. I cleaned until my back screamed, until my knees went numb. And yet, somehow, I believed this place cared for me, that if I worked hard enough, the people inside would see me as more than the help. Now I was back, and the walls felt colder than I remembered. The agent opened the tall windows. Light flooded in, spilling across the floors like it was trying to wash the years away. Dust danced in the air, glittering for a moment before disappearing again. I took a deep breath and realized my hands were shaking. "You all right, Mrs. Grace?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. "It's just strange being home again." I didn't tell her the whole truth. That the last time I stood in this foyer, I was holding a garbage bag of my clothes, dripping rainwater on the floor, while the lady of the house watched from the stairs. She didn't even say my name. Just handed me an envelope and said, "You know what you did." I didn't, not then. Now, standing in the same spot 15 years later, I felt a rush of heat rise to my face. Not anger, not yet, just the shock of memory, the echo of injustice that never really fades, even after you rebuild your life. The agent's voice brought me back. "So, are you sure this is the place you want for your studio? There are plenty of newer properties." I cut her off softly. "No, this is the one. This house owes me a story." She laughed nervously, not sure how to respond, and walked ahead to unlock the back terrace. I stayed behind a moment longer, eyes on the bronze key behind the glass. For years I thought that sound, the jingle of it on my belt, meant belonging. Now I understood. It was just the sound of someone else's power in my pocket. I don't know what hurts more, losing the house, or losing the belief that I ever truly belonged inside it. 15 years ago, I worked for the Whitmore family, one of those names people in Belcrest said with a mix of envy and reverence. Their mansion sat high above the city, white stone glowing like a temple of success. To me, it was just another house I had to keep spotless. I started there when I was 47. At that time, I had nothing but a small apartment, a second-hand car, and a daughter in college who thought her mother's job was temporary. I told her it was. I didn't tell her I planned to stay until she graduated, no matter how long that took. I worked 14 hours a day, sometimes 16 during the holidays. I cleaned the pool in the mornings before the sun rose, scrubbed the marble columns, ironed the curtains, and cooked for 6 people. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, their 2 grown children, and whoever they decided to entertain that week. My paycheck was $1,200 a month. After rent and gas, I sent most of it to my daughter's university. The rest I saved in an envelope under my mattress, labeled in pencil, Freedom Fund. The bronze key that hung from my belt was my quiet trophy. It opened almost every door in that house, closets, guest rooms, even the wine cellar. Only one door stayed locked, Mr. Whitmore's private office on the 2nd floor. He kept the key to that one on a gold chain around his neck. Still, every time the metal jingled at my hip, I felt a strange kind of pride. It meant they trusted me. It meant I mattered. At least, that's what I thought back then. Mrs. Madeline Whitmore was the first person to notice how I worked. She liked her towels folded in thirds, not halves, her perfume arranged by color, her tea poured before it boiled. She had a way of giving orders that sounded almost gentle, until you realized you were holding your breath trying not to disappoint her. One evening, as I polished the silver trays in the dining room, she stood behind me and said, "Elena, you're the only one I can truly trust." Her voice was soft, almost kind. Those words sank deep. Nobody had ever said that to me before. I smiled and said, "Thank you, ma'am." She placed her hand lightly on my shoulder, a gesture so rare it almost felt motherly. Looking back, I think that was the moment I decided I would do anything to keep her trust. And I did. I kept every secret she handed me, some harmless, others heavy. I saw the envelopes she hid behind books, the phone calls she took on the terrace after midnight, the way her voice changed when she said her husband's name. I told myself it wasn't my place to ask. My job was to clean, not to understand. There were good days too. Summer mornings when the house smelled of fresh bread and the first light spilled through the glass roof. Mr. Whitmore would wave at me from the pool and joke, "You work harder than the whole construction team I pay." I would laugh and keep scrubbing the tiles, proud of how they sparkled. Sometimes their daughter, Lydia, came home from college. She would toss her heels by the stairs and call out, "Elena, you're a lifesaver. Could you steam my dress? I have a party at 7. She always said thank you, but never looked me in the eye. Still, I liked her. She reminded me of my own child, only living a different life. In the evenings, when everyone was gone, I sat on the kitchen steps with a cup of instant coffee and listened to the house settle. The pipes hissed, the fridge hummed, the wind brushed against the glass. Small sounds that made me feel less alone. The key became part of me. It jingled when I walked, and sometimes at night I would find myself holding it while I drifted to sleep. It wasn't just access. It was belonging. When you work for people like the Whitmores, you learn to take pride in small permissions. Once, I asked Mrs. Whitmore if I could use the front staircase instead of the service stairs because my knees were giving out. She said, "Of course, Elena. You've earned it." That sentence, "You've earned it," made my chest swell. I believed her. But even then, small cracks had started to show. There were days when she snapped at me for things I hadn't done. If the tablecloth wasn't centered, she'd frown and say, "You're slipping lately." I would apologize, even when I hadn't slipped at all. Once she found a fingerprint on a silver tray and said quietly, "I thought you were more careful." It wasn't anger in her voice that scared me. It was disappointment. It made me want to work harder, to prove I was still the person she trusted. That word, trust, was a leash, and I didn't know it. I remember one December night when snow fell thick outside and the family was away in Aspen. I stayed behind to guard the house, as usual. Around midnight, I heard a faint beep from upstairs. The alarm from the office door. It startled me. I went up with a flashlight, thinking maybe the wind had triggered something. The door to Mr. Whitmore's office was slightly open. Inside, the computer screen glowed blue. I froze at the threshold, heart pounding. I had never seen that door open before. Then a voice echoed from the hallway. "Mrs. Whitmore's. Elena, what are you doing up here?" She was standing there in a robe, holding her phone. I stumbled over my words. "I heard a sound, ma'am." I thought. Her eyes narrowed for half a second before she smiled. Of course, you're very diligent. She stepped inside, typed something on the keyboard, and the screen went dark. Don't worry about it, she said softly. Go get some sleep. I did as she said, but something about her tone stayed with me. Later that night, I dreamed I was holding the bronze key, and it kept turning in my hand until it melted. Looking back, there were warning signs everywhere. The whispered phone calls, the sudden visits from her accountant, the way Mr. Whitmore avoided eye contact with me after that winter. But I was too loyal, or too afraid, to see what was coming. I told myself I was lucky. A steady job, a roof over my head, people who said my name with respect. I didn't notice how that respect had started to sound like ownership. That year, my daughter graduated. I sent her photos of me standing by the fountain in the Whitmore garden, smiling in my uniform. I told her, "Look, Mama made it." She replied, "I'm proud of you, Mom. You always find a way to belong anywhere." That message made me cry, because I believed it too. I thought belonging meant loyalty. I didn't understand that, in that house, loyalty was only good until it became inconvenient. One night, after a long dinner party, Mrs. Whitmore poured herself a glass of wine and said to me, almost tenderly, "You know, Elena, sometimes I think you're the only person who sees this house for what it really is." I smiled, not sure what she meant. She went on, "Every house has its secrets. Ours just wears prettier walls." I laughed politely, but my stomach tightened. I didn't realize then how literal her words were, or how soon I'd be blamed for a secret that wasn't mine to keep. I was 45 then, younger in body but older in worry. Every morning I woke before the sun, when the sky was still the color of dishwater and the mansion slept like a spoiled child. In the kitchen, I'd switch on the small radio beside the sink and play Moon River. The sound filled the tiled walls, soft, steady, the only voice that never gave me orders. I used that song to time my work. By the second verse, the coffee would be ready. By the final hum, I'd be folding napkins in perfect thirds. The rhythm made me feel invisible in a peaceful way, like I belonged to something that didn't judge me. Years later, when I built my first photo studio, I still used Moon River to test the lighting. Old habits travel with you, even when you think you've left the house behind. Back then, I used to look out through the glass doors that faced the garden. Beyond the fountain, the hills of Belcrest would glow pink with morning light. Sometimes I'd pause, just for a second, and whisper to myself, "If I could stay here without being afraid of anyone yelling my name, I'd be happy." It was a foolish dream, but it kept me breathing through the long hours. One morning, the Whitmores' son, Evan, came into the kitchen while I was arranging breakfast trays. He was 20-something, handsome in that careless, rich way. "Do you ever get tired of all this?" he asked, gesturing to the counters piled with fruit and china. "Me's." I thought he was teasing. "I get tired, yes," I said, "but not of work. Of being talked over." He blinked, surprised. "Nobody should talk over you," he said, half smiling. "You run this place better than my mother." It was the first time anyone in that house had spoken to me like I mattered. For a second, I forgot to be careful. I laughed. A real laugh, not the polite one I usually saved for guests. Then he was gone, leaving the scent of his cologne hanging in the air, and I went back to slicing fruit, pretending my heart hadn't just remembered it was still capable of beating fast. That small exchange stayed with me longer than it should have, not because it was romantic, it wasn't, but because it reminded me I was still human. That simple recognition, after years of being a background noise in other people's lives, felt like sunlight through dirty glass. When I think of those days, I see flashes, the sound of heels on marble, the sting of bleach on my hands, the hush before a door closed behind a secret. But I also remember little kindnesses, the gardener sharing peaches from his lunchbox, the driver slipping me leftover pastries, the old neighbor who waved every Thursday when I took the trash out. Tiny proofs that the world outside the mansion still had room for people like me. Sometimes, after everyone had gone to bed, I'd stand on the terrace and watch the city lights below. They looked like a second sky, one where nobody knew who cleaned whose house. I'd imagine my daughter among those lights, studying late at the university I was paying for with my aching back and blistered palms. I told myself all the pain was worth it if it bought her a brighter future. But there were nights when loneliness crept in anyway, sharp, sudden, unreasonable. That's when I'd take out the bronze key from my belt, hold it up to the moonlight, and whisper, "At least this still opens something." The metal would feel warm from my hand, and I'd fall asleep believing that counted for something. One Sunday, Mrs. Whitmore returned early from a charity gala. She found me sitting on the kitchen floor, fixing a broken music box the grandchildren had left behind. Instead of scolding me, she crouched down and said, "You have delicate hands, Elena. You should be doing something creative." I smiled, not knowing how to answer. "Well, maybe one day," I said. She nodded, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "You're loyal," she added. "That's rare." I remember thinking that was the nicest thing anyone had ever said to me. I didn't know compliments could also be chains. The following spring, she gave me a gift, a hand camera. "It's for your days off," she said. "You're always noticing details. The way the light hits the windows, the color of the sky. Try capturing them." I held that camera like it was made of gold. On Sundays, I'd walk through the neighborhood taking pictures of flowers, cracked pavements, stray cats. Each photo felt like a tiny act of freedom. That camera sits in my studio now, polished and working again. I use it to remind my students, mostly women my age, that beauty isn't a luxury, it's proof we survived long enough to see it. Looking back, those early years in the Whitmore mansion were a strange mix of pride and denial. I was grateful, but I was shrinking. I convinced myself that being indispensable meant being safe. I didn't realize that the moment I stopped being useful, I'd also stop being seen. If there's one image that captures that time, it's this. Me standing by the window before dawn, the camera on the counter, Moon River on the radio, and the bronze key gleaming at my waist. Everything I needed to feel alive was in that moment. Music, light, purpose. Everything that would break me later was there, too. It with a sound. One afternoon, while polishing the hallway mirror outside the master suite, I heard raised voices behind the half-closed door. That house was never loud. Even its arguments were usually wrapped in manners. But that day, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore were not pretending. "Don't let her find out," he hissed. His voice was sharp enough to slice through the wood. Her answer came lower, steady. "I can handle Elena." The word handle chilled me more than if she had shouted. I froze, the rag still in my hand, my reflection wavering in the mirror. Light from under the door caught the bronze key at my waist. It glinted, once like it, too, had heard its name mentioned. I stepped back, heart beating too loud, afraid they'd notice. For the rest of the day, I tried to convince myself I'd misheard. Maybe they meant another Elena. Though there was no other. In the days that followed, the house shifted in ways only someone like me would notice. The air felt heavier. Doors that used to stay open were closed. Mr. Whitmore stopped greeting me in the mornings. Instead, he walked past as if I'd turned invisible. Mrs. Whitmore's smile, always perfectly measured, now lingered a little too long, like she was checking for cracks. During dinner service one evening, she asked casually, "Elena, have you ever been in my husband's office?" "No, ma'am," I said quickly, to clean the hallway. She gave a tiny nod, the kind that said nothing but meant everything. When she looked away, I realized my palms were damp. The rest of the staff began to whisper, small things that slipped between their chores. The driver said he'd seen a different woman leaving the house late at night. The gardener muttered that someone was moving boxes out of the wine cellar. I told them to mind their own business, but inside I felt a knot forming. One night, as I closed the curtains in the dining room, I saw Mr. Whitmore standing by the fountain outside, talking on his phone. His face was turned away, his free hand gripping the edge of the marble. I couldn't hear his words, but his shoulders looked like stone rigid, strained. A flash of lightning lit the sky. For a second, his reflection appeared in the glass beside mine. Two tired people in the same frame, both pretending the house wasn't collapsing around them. A few mornings later, Mrs. Whitmore came into the kitchen earlier than usual. She was dressed impeccably, as always, though her lipstick was uneven. "Elena," she said with that same velvet tone, "you've been working too hard. Take a break, a few weeks perhaps." I hesitated. "Is something wrong, ma'am?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course not. Everyone needs rest." She placed an envelope on the counter cash for the week and added, almost kindly, "Don't worry. We'll manage." I wanted to ask, "Manage without me?" but I didn't. Years of obedience silenced the question before it reached my tongue. When she left, I stared at the envelope, the edge damp with condensation from the iced glass she'd set beside it. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. I picked up the bronze key, heavier than usual, and slipped it into my pocket. "They're just stressed," I told myself. "It's the business, not me." But deep down, something was shifting. The way the house seemed to watch me now, the way the chandeliers hummed when the air conditioner kicked on, like they were whispering about what was coming. That evening, I walked through every room one last time before locking up. The portraits on the walls, smiling Whitmores in silk and pearls, seemed to follow me with their eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel like part of the house. I felt like a stranger trespassing where she no longer belonged. Still, I tried to believe in logic. People get tired. Families fight. Maybe they just needed space. I looked down at my hands, raw from bleach and soap, and made myself a promise. Tomorrow I would come back early, as usual. I wouldn't let gossip or fear ruin the one good thing I'd built. As I turned off the kitchen light, the key in my pocket pressed against my leg. A cold reminder of every door I could open and the one I couldn't. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny weight was warning me. The house was about to lock me out for good. It happened on a Thursday night, late spring. The kind of night when the air feels heavy, like the sky is holding its breath. I was in the laundry room folding the Whitmores' dinner linens when I heard the knock. Sharp, official, wrong for that hour. At first, I thought it was a delivery. But when I opened the front door, 2 police officers stood there, rain dripping off their hats. "Mrs. Elena Grace?" "Yes," I said, unsure if I should invite them in. One of them glanced at a small notepad. "We have a report that you've been involved in a theft. Jewelry belonging to the homeowner has been found in your possession." For a moment, I couldn't even process the words. "What?" I said, laughing a little. The way you do when something sounds absurd. There must be a mistake. Behind them, headlights cut through the rain as the Whitmores' car pulled up the driveway. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore stepped out, both dressed in evening clothes. Mrs. Whitmore's expression was unreadable. Her red lipstick hadn't smudged despite the weather. The taller officer asked if he could check my room. "Of course," I said, still believing this was some bizarre misunderstanding. I led them down the servants' corridor, my heart knocking against my ribs. They opened drawers, lifted linens, checked the closet. Yet one of them paused. "Guys, here," he said quietly. He reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. It was the same blue box Mrs. Sturz Whitmore kept on her dressing table, the one that held her diamond bracelet. I recognized it instantly because I'd dusted around it for years, careful never to touch. "This isn't mine," I said, my throat closing up. But the box was open, and inside lay the bracelet, glittering under the flashlight beam. I remember the silence that followed. Not angry, not loud, just thick. Mrs. Whitmore stood in the doorway, rain still on her shoulders, eyes fixed on me. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look at all. "Ma'am," one officer said to her, "is this the missing item?" She nodded once. "Yes, that's mine." I turned to her, desperate. "Mrs. Whitmore, please, you know I'd never take anything. You gave me the key to your rooms." Her face didn't change. "Maybe I gave you too much trust," she said softly. That line, so calm, so final, sliced right through me. I tried again. "Someone must have planted it. You know how careful I am. You said yourself." But she turned away before I could finish. The officer cleared his throat. "We won't arrest you tonight, but you'll need to come in tomorrow for questioning." Mr. Whitmore spoke for the first time. "That won't be necessary. She no longer works here." He looked at me the way people look at a stain they can't wash out. They let me pack my things while the rain outside grew louder, hammering the glass like it wanted to come in and defend me. The other staff stayed out of sight. No one came to say a word. Only the clock in the hallway kept ticking, indifferent. I folded my uniforms, my shoes, my photos of my daughter. When I turned to leave, my reflection in the mirror startled me. Pale, damp, small. For 15 years I'd walked those hallways quietly, believing silence was safety. But in that moment, silence felt like guilt. At the front door, I stopped. Mrs. Whitmore stood at the top of the stairs, watching. I opened my mouth to speak, but all that came out was a whisper. Why? She said nothing. Only her earrings moved, catching the chandelier's light, the same cold shimmer as the bracelet in the box. The officers followed me outside to make sure I left. Rain hit my face like needles. When I reached for the gate, the bronze key slipped from my hand and fell onto the driveway. The sound it made, "King," was small but final. I bent down to pick it up, but one of the officers stopped me. "Leave it," he said. "You don't need that anymore." He was right. That key had opened every room in the house, but never one where I truly belonged. So I left it there, gleaming against the wet stone. I walked for nearly an hour before I realized I still had my apron on. The pockets were heavy with rainwater. When I reached the bus stop, I sat on the bench, dripping, trembling, clutching the envelope of wages Mrs. Whitmore had given me the week before. Inside were 12 crumpled bills and a note I'd written to myself months earlier. Freedom Fund. Don't touch. That night, I used it to pay for a motel room. I slept in my uniform, the smell of lemon polish still clinging to me. I kept seeing the bracelet, how it sparkled when they opened the box, how everyone believed it was proof. And in my dreams, I heard that metallic kung again and again. The sound of the key hitting the ground, the sound of my life coming undone. By morning, the storm had passed. The motel window faced east, and sunlight crept across the floor. I sat up slowly, aching everywhere. I told myself I'd go back, clear my name, make them listen. But I didn't. Something inside me had cracked too deeply to patch in a single day. I stared at my hands. The same hands that had once polished their silver, folded their napkins, lifted their glasses without leaving a trace, and realized they were shaking. Not from fear anymore, but from exhaustion. That's when I understood. Sometimes the sound of something breaking isn't the end. It's the only thing loud enough to wake you up. After that night, I didn't go back to the mansion. I couldn't. I found a room to rent above a laundromat in Glendale. One window, one narrow bed, one chair. The wallpaper peeled at the edges, and the pipes clanged like restless ghosts. But it was mine. For the first few weeks, I barely spoke to anyone. I went through the motions of living, eating soup from a can, walking to the corner store, pretending not to notice when people stared at the stains on my uniform. Work came slowly. A friend from church found me a job as a waitress at a small diner downtown. The shifts were long, the tips short, but no one there called me thief. The smell of coffee and bacon replaced lemon wax and perfume. It took months before I could hear keys jangling without feeling sick. I tried not to think about the Whitmores. But at night, when I lay on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, the scenes replayed themselves. The velvet box, the rain, her eyes refusing to meet mine. Sometimes I'd wake up reaching for the key that wasn't there. One evening, as I cleaned the diner after closing, I found an old camera under a booth seat, forgotten by a customer. It was nothing fancy, just a cheap digital one, but I turned it on out of curiosity. There were 3 photos inside. A child blowing bubbles, a dog running through a sprinkler, a woman laughing behind a birthday cake. Ordinary moments, imperfect, unpolished, but so alive. I don't know why, but that night something inside me shifted, maybe because the photos reminded me of the small things I'd once noticed in the mansion. The way light hit the staircase at noon, or how the rain made patterns on the glass. Only this time, I wasn't polishing someone else's reflection. I was seeing mine. That same week, I used half my savings to sign up for a night class in photography at the community college. I was the oldest student by at least 20 years. My hands shook when I first held the camera, afraid, maybe, of breaking something new. The instructor, a quiet man named Mr. Han, looked at my first assignment, a black and white photo of a laundromat window, and said, "You have a good eye. You see emotion in stillness." That was the first compliment I'd heard in years that didn't come with conditions. I cried all the way home on the bus. The next decade was slow work and slow healing. I spent mornings serving coffee, afternoons taking photos for anyone who would let me, and nights studying light, framing, patience. I shot weddings, newborns, headshots, graduations. I learned that every face carries a story if you wait long enough for it to show. People began to ask for me by name. Elena Grace, the woman who makes you look like yourself. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman once accused of stealing jewels now made a living capturing something even rarer: truth. Every time a client looked at her portrait and whispered, "That's really me," I felt a small piece of my old shame dissolve. 10 years after I left Belcrest Hill, I opened a small portrait studio above a flower shop. I painted the walls cream, hung soft curtains, and played Moon River on repeat. Sometimes, when the light came in just right, I'd imagine it was the same light that used to stream through the Whitmore windows. Only now, it belonged to me. Then, 15 years after the night they threw me out, I got a call from a real estate agent. A property had just come up for lease, Whitmore Mansion. I laughed at first, thinking it was a cruel joke. But when she gave me the address, my heart stopped. Belcrest Hill. The same driveway. The same wrought iron gate. I drove up there the next day. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown. The gardens were unkept, the fountain dry, the paint on the shutters fading. I trembled it. When the agent asked if I was interested, I said yes before she finished the question. Not out of revenge. I had none left. But because I wanted to fill that house with a different kind of sound. Not orders, not whispers, laughter. A month later, Grace Portrait Studio opened its doors inside the mansion I had once cleaned. The first photo I hung was a self-portrait. Nothing fancy, just me in a plain blouse, holding my camera, smiling slightly. Next to it, in a glass frame, hung the bronze key I had found years earlier. Yes, I had gone back for it that night, after the rain stopped. I'd walked all the way up the hill before sunrise, picked it off the driveway and slipped it into my pocket. I told myself it wasn't theft, it was proof. Proof that something which once belonged to my silence now belonged to my story. That key sits on the studio wall today, shining under a single beam of light. Clients often ask about it. I tell them, it used to open someone else's house. Now, it opens mine. Looking back, I know the turning point wasn't the accusation, or the police, or even the years that followed. It was the night I said yes, not to anger, but to possibility. It was the moment I stopped trying to prove my innocence to people who had already decided my guilt. Instead, I started proving my worth to myself. Every time I unlock the studio door in the morning, I whisper the same thought, the same truth I've carried ever since. The night they closed their doors on me, I didn't know I'd just opened another one. The morning of the opening felt like standing on the edge of two lives, one behind me, one waiting to begin. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the mansion, now my studio. The smell of fresh paint mixed with coffee and lilies. On the wall hung the sign I'd painted myself. Grace. Portraits, the art of seeing yourself. I'd invited local journalists, artists, a few former clients, and some of the neighborhood women who had once worked as cleaners, nannies, caregivers. They came dressed in their best blouses, nervous but proud. "This house has never looked so alive," one of them whispered, her eyes glistening. I smiled, though my stomach twisted. Every creak of the floorboards, every gleam of marble still carried ghosts. But today, I had decided to meet them all, even the living ones. Halfway through the event, while I was speaking to a reporter from the Belcrest Chronicle, the door opened. A hush rippled through the room. Standing there, in a cream-colored coat and pearls, was Madeline Whitmore. Older, yes, Her hair silver now, her posture a little bent, but unmistakable. Even from across the room, I could smell her perfume. The same sharp jasmine scent that used to announce her presence before her heels even hit the floor. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Then, instinct took over. I straightened, smiled, and said to the reporter, "Excuse me a moment." She was already walking toward me, her heels tapping against the same marble I had once scrubbed on my knees. People turned to watch, whispering. Cameras splashed. "So it's true," she said when she reached me. Her voice was smooth as ever, but there was a tremor beneath it. "You really did rent my house." "Your former house," I corrected gently. Her mouth curled. "Is that what you call it now?" I suppose money buys new definitions. I met her eyes. Colder than I remembered. "No, Mrs. Whitmore, time does." The silence between us stretched thin. Then she tilted her head, smiling like a cat. "Tell me, Elena, does it ever feel strange to play hostess here? To entertain people in rooms you used to mop?" There was laughter from someone in the crowd, nervous, shallow. I felt my pulse in my throat but kept my tone even. "Not strange," I said. "Liberating. I finally learned how to see beauty without asking permission." She looked me over, her gaze landing on my simple black dress, my short gray hair. "You've aged," she said quietly, almost pitying. "So have you," I replied. Her smile faltered, just for a second. Then she gestured toward the wall behind me. A large black and white portrait dominating the room. It showed a woman kneeling on the floor, mop in hand, her face lifted toward a stream of light from an unseen window. Her expression wasn't weary. It was defiant, serene. "Who's that?" Madeline asked, feigning curiosity. I turned toward it, feeling the familiar ache rise in my chest. "That," I said, "is the woman who built this place, even if no one ever saw her name on the deed." The room had gone silent. I could hear the cameras clicking softly, reporters leaning closer. Then I added evenly, "That woman is me." Madeline's hand froze on her pearl necklace. For a moment she said nothing. Audience waited. "I don't recall hiring an artist," she said finally, her voice clipped. "You didn't," I said. "You hired a servant." But the difference was never in what we did, it was in who got to keep their name. A murmur moved through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is she serious?" Another said, "That's her, the one from the story years ago." Madeline caught the shift, turned to the onlookers, and smiled as though staging a play. "Oh, don't believe everything you hear," she said lightly. "We had a misunderstanding, that's all." I let out a small laugh. "You're right. Misunderstandings can last decades." A journalist stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, is it true there was an incident years ago involving—" But she cut him off, waving her hand. "We don't need to dig up old gossip." I took a deep breath. It wasn't gossip. It was my life. Every eye turned back to me. I felt the weight of the room. Sympathy from some, curiosity from others, the old power struggle alive again under brighter light. Madeline's tone sharpened. "You have no proof of anything, Elena." "Proof?" I echoed. "I don't need it anymore. I have peace, and that's something you can't buy, even with all your pearls." That line, calm, measured, landed harder than shouting ever could. She looked as if I had slapped her. The photographer from the Chronicle raised his camera. "Ladies, can I take a picture?" I hesitated, then nodded. Madeline forced a smile, angling her chin just so, the way she always had in charity photos. I stayed still beside her, eyes forward, hands folded calmly. The flash went off. The light bounced off the glass frame behind us, the one holding the bronze key. It glowed for a moment like a medal catching the sun. The photographer murmured, "Perfect." The past and the present in one frame. When the event ended, guests mingled quietly. Madeline lingered near the door, pretending to admire the photographs, her hands trembling slightly. She caught me watching and said, "Enjoy it while it lasts, Elena. You'll never outrun where you came from." I walked closer until we stood an arm's length apart. "I'm not trying to outrun it," I said. "I'm reframing it." Then I leaned in just enough for only her to hear. "Do you ever think about that night?" The bracelet? The box? Her lips parted, but no words came. She blinked. Once, twice, then turned and walked out. Her perfume lingered long after she'd gone. A reporter came up afterward. "Oh, you're?" he asked, half in awe. "Yes," I said. "That was Mrs. Biss's. Whitmore." He frowned. "And you still invited her?" "I didn't," I said. "But she came anyway. Some people can't resist checking whether you still remember your place." He nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "What should I call this piece?" I thought for a moment, looking around at the women standing near the portraits. The ones who had cleaned houses, cooked meals, raised other people's children. "Call it The Woman Who Came Home," I said. He smiled. "That's powerful." I smiled back. "It's true." That night, after everyone left, I turned off the lights one by one. The house was quiet again, but no longer cold. I stood in front of the portrait of myself on the floor, the one Madeline had asked about, and studied it in the dim glow. In the reflection of the glass, I saw both of us, the woman I had been and the woman I had become. Between them hung the bronze key, catching the faintest bit of moonlight. I whispered to the empty room, "You see, Madeline, I didn't steal your jewels. I only took back my name." Outside, the night wind carried the faint scent of jasmine. Hers. But it no longer made me flinch. It only reminded me how far I'd come from the woman who used to scrub her floors and pray for kindness. Now, I didn't need kindness. I had my own light. A week after the opening, I started noticing the shift. Not in the air this time, but in people. It began with a phone call. A client, a woman named Renee, had booked a family session months in advance. It was polite but uneasy. "Elena," she said softly, "I think I'll have to reschedule. My husband's not comfortable, with what he read online." "What did he read?" I asked, though part of me already knew. She hesitated. "There's a piece, well, a few actually. Some blog says you used questionable money to rent the mansion. That you're under investigation for something." Her voice trailed off, apologetic. I thanked her for letting me know, hung up, and sat still for a long time. When I finally searched my name online, there it was. "From maid to millionaire. The dark money behind Grace portraits." The article used an old photo of me from the diner days, hair pulled back, face tired, as if to prove I couldn't have become anything better without cheating. It claimed I'd been paid off years ago by the Whitmores after a legal dispute, and that I'd used the money to buy her way back into Belcrest. No source, no proof, just poison in polished sentences. By the next morning, 2 more outlets had copied it word for word. Within 3 days, I'd lost half my bookings. People don't need truth. They just need something to whisper over dinner. I didn't have to guess where it started. Madeline Whitmore had always known how to make a story sound elegant enough to be believed. Her strength was never shouting. It was suggestion. "Don't you think it's odd?" she'd say, and let silence do the rest. I could almost hear her voice in the articles, the same tone she used years ago when she told the police. Maybe I gave her too much trust. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself, truth doesn't need defending, but the truth was smaller than the headlines. By the end of the week, my studio phone stopped ringing. The mail slot filled with anonymous letters. Some supportive, most cruel. One said, "Once a thief, always a thief." Another, "You can change your clothes, not your kind." I kept them all in a drawer, not because I wanted reminders, but because evidence comes in many forms. Late one evening, I received an email from a young journalist named Clara Nguyen. She'd attended the opening event. Her subject line read, "They're coming after you." Inside, she wrote, "Mrs. Dad, Grace, I thought you should know. Mrs. Whitmore has been calling editors. She's implying your business is a front for illegal funds. She's also offering donations to certain charities that are conveniently connected to those editors." I stared at the screen, then wrote back, "Thank you, Clara. Don't worry about me. I've survived worse rooms than this." But as I hit send, my hand trembled. Not from fear, from focus. Every photographer knows Before you expose the film, you must control the light. I began to plan. The next week, I went back to work as if nothing had happened. I cleaned the studio myself. I watered the plants, adjusted the curtains, and replayed Moon River until the silence felt comfortable again. But I also started documenting. Every article, every post, every cancellation email. Printed, dated, saved. I kept notes on who said what, who shared what. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was precision. One afternoon, as I was sorting through the evidence, I caught my reflection in the framed portrait of myself on the wall. Same woman, different fight. I whispered to it, half smiling. We used to clean up other people's messes. Now, we'll clean up the truth. Then came the TV interview. The local channel invited me to a small segment on women entrepreneurs of Belcrest. I almost declined, the timing felt dangerous. But something inside said, go. You don't hide from lies, you outshine them. The host was friendly, clearly briefed to keep it light. So, Elena, your story has inspired so many, from housemaid to studio owner. What's your secret? I smiled. Forgive yourself before you ask the world to. He laughed politely, then hesitated. There's been some noise lately about your success. Do you want to address it? I met the camera lens like it was an old friend. I've heard the stories, I said. They're creative, I'll give them that. But every dollar I've made came from the same thing. Work. The kind that leaves your hands sore and your heart proud. The host nodded, caught off guard by my calmness. I finished with, you can borrow a house, even borrow power. But you can't borrow integrity. That you earn every day. The clip aired the next morning. By noon, it had gone viral, not because it was dramatic, but because people recognized sincerity when they heard it. Even lies lose their grip when you speak plain truth. Still, Madeline didn't stop. She moved from whispers to shadows. Anonymous profiles started posting under my clients' pages. Ask her about the bracelet, one wrote. Another, did she tell you how she got that house? My assistant, a bright young woman named Maria, looked terrified when she showed me the comments. Should we delete them? She asked. I said, no, let them stay. Light needs something to shine on. But beneath my composure, I was preparing. I reached out to Clara, the journalist again. Would you like a real story? I wrote. Not about money, about what silence costs. She replied within an hour. Yes, but only if you're ready for what comes after. I was. We met in the studio one rainy evening. She brought her recorder. I brought the drawer of letters. I told her everything. The bracelet, the police, the years rebuilding, and the new lies. I didn't raise my voice once. When I finished, she asked quietly, what do you want people to take from this? I said, that truth doesn't fade. It just waits for the right light. She nodded, eyes glassy. 2 days later, her article was published. The woman they tried to erase. It wasn't flashy. It was honest. She laid out facts, timelines, and statements. She interviewed old co-workers who remembered my firing. Even the gardener, who confirmed he'd seen Mrs. Bess. Whitmore near the servant quarters that night before the police came. The article didn't accuse. It revealed. It ended with a single line. In her studio on Belcrest Hill, a bronze key hangs on the wall. A quiet reminder that the doors they close on us can still lead to light. The backlash hit fast. People began questioning Madeline online, asking for proof. Her charity board distanced itself. By the end of the week, one of the tabloids that had smeared me issued a half-hearted correction. Clients began calling again, some apologizing, some pretending they'd never canceled. I accepted every booking, not out of forgiveness but out of principle. Let the house earn joy again, one portrait at a time. Late one night, as I was closing up, I saw an envelope slipped under the studio door. Inside was a single note, written in neat cursive. You should have stayed where you belonged. M. I stared at it for a while, then placed it under the glass frame beside the bronze key. I whispered, I did stay where I belonged. You're the one who left the light behind. Then, I switched off the lamp. The studio fell into darkness for a moment, before the motion sensor light clicked back on, illuminating the key, the letter, and my reflection faintly smiling in the glass. Alas, because I had the truth, framed and shining quietly in its place. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just the end of her rumor. It was the beginning of my reflection's revenge. The woman who found beauty, the curtain I folded this morning. I think about the path I've taken, the room on the laundromat, the night classes, the hours of running errands to pay for my children's school fees. I think about the jingle of keys falling on the rainy night, about the feeling of being thrown out. I nod. Thank you, I say to Clara as she stands up, already holding her briefcase. Now this house will witness one last shoot. She smiles, and we get ready. Not for revenge, but for a clean, lighted, evidenced exposure. Why you? The studio is quiet. I put the key in a small frame, take a few pictures to remember this day. The slanted light from the window on the key, the curtain slightly tilted. That light will be the witness. After the recording came to light, I stopped thinking about revenge. What I wanted now was exposure. Not of her, but of the truth she had always tried to hide. The invisible hands that built her world. I decided to stage a photography exhibition. Its name came to me one sleepless night, simple and certain. The hands that built this house. Every photograph would feature the people who worked behind closed doors. The cleaners, the gardeners, the cooks, the nannies. The ones who kept Beverly Hills shining while their own names never made it past the gates. It would be a story told through their faces, their hands, their posture. Their quiet strength. I spent weeks preparing. Every day, after closing my studio, I drove around the neighborhood in my old blue car, knocking on back doors instead of front ones. At first, people were suspicious. Why us? They asked. Because, I said, you built this city, but no one ever saw your reflection in it. Some smiled shyly, others cried. They came from El Salvador, Mexico, Vietnam, the Philippines. Different languages, same calluses. I brought my camera, a small folding chair, and a promise. No makeup, no posing, just light. Honest light. I photographed them in their uniforms, in their aprons, with their tools still in hand. A gardener with cracked palms. A cook wiping sweat from her neck. A nanny holding a child's toy close to her chest. I told them, you don't need to smile. You just need to be seen. And in every frame, I found something sacred. A quiet kind of dignity that no scandal could ever destroy. In between shoots, I worked with Clara, the journalist, to prepare the official launch. We agreed the exhibition would open inside my studio, the same mansion that once belonged to the Whitmores. We would invite the public, the press, and every person who had ever worked behind those iron gates. It would be both art and statement. A mirror turned toward the people who had always been asked to look away. One evening, Clara asked, "Are you ready for what this might bring? If Mrs. Whitmore shows up again, this could get loud." I smiled. Good. Let her hear the echoes this time. Maria helped me print the photos, large and raw. We hung them one by one along the hallway. Hands wiping windows, hands serving meals, hands holding nothing but air. Under each portrait, a simple caption. The hands that built this house. At the end of the corridor, I placed one final frame. Not of anyone else, but of my own hands. Wrinkled, scarred, still steady. The caption read, "The hands that were once accused, now create light." When I stepped back to look, I felt something lift inside me. This wasn't a show, it was a reckoning, told in silence and shutter clicks. The night before the exhibition, I walked through the mansion alone. The room smelled of fresh paint and lilies again. I touched the cold marble banister, remembering the girl I'd been, the one who used to scrub that same railing until her knuckles bled. In the main gallery, the bronze key hung where it always did, inside its glass frame. Next to it, I'd added something new. The anonymous note that said, "You should have stayed where you belonged." I wanted people to see both, the threat and the proof of survival. The past and the present, side by side. That night, as I checked the final lighting angles, Maria said quietly, "You're nervous." "Not nervous," I said. "Just ready." She pointed to the wall of portraits. "You gave them something no one else ever did." "What's that?" I asked. "Visibility," she said. "And power?" Her words hit me deeper than she knew. Because for years, I'd been invisible too. A background noise in someone else's story. Now, I was giving visibility to everyone who had ever felt the same. I sent out invitations to the exhibition with a short note attached, to those who ever worked behind a door they didn't own. "This night is for you." I mailed one to every address I could find in the Whitmore family's old contact book. And yes, I sent one to Mrs. Madeline Whitmore herself. No return address. Just the title. "The Hands That Built This House." It wasn't spite. It was symmetry. The morning of the event, I woke early, brewed coffee, and put on my plain black dress. The same one I wore the day she confronted me at the opening. I brushed my hair, fastened my small silver earrings, and looked in the mirror. No anger left. Only focus. When I reached the studio, the sun had just begun to rise. Light filtered through the tall windows, touching the portraits one by one, making each pair of hands glow. It felt like the house itself was preparing, whispering, "We're ready." By afternoon, Clara had set up the press area, Maria arranged flowers, and the guests began to arrive. From the second-floor balcony, I watched them, workers, journalists, neighbors, walking through the halls, staring at the photos in silence. Some smiled, some wiped their eyes, and there, in the crowd, I saw something that made me pause. A familiar silhouette near the back, silver hair glinting in the light. Even before I saw her face, I knew. Madeline Whitmore had come. But this time, I didn't flinch. This time, I owned the ground she walked on. When the doors closed for the evening, I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by faces that finally had names. Every photograph glowed under soft white light, every story written quietly across their wrinkles. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting her anymore. I was finishing something. Tomorrow, the press would run the recordings. Tomorrow, her voice would be on the news, not mine. And tomorrow, this house would bear witness to a truth she could never erase. I turned off the last light, took one final look at the bronze key, and whispered to the empty room. "You opened every door but this one, Madeline. And this one opens only to the truth." Then I locked the door behind me, not in fear, but in triumph. Because I knew, come morning, the whole world would finally see what we built in the dark, and who really held the light. The night of the exhibition arrived like the final click of a shutter. By 7 o'clock, the house, my house, was full. The marble floors glowed under soft light. The air buzzed with conversation, clinking glasses, camera flashes. Outside, a line of people still waited to get in. Former housekeepers, reporters, neighbors, even a few socialites who once wouldn't have let me through their gate. I stood by the entrance, greeting each guest, the way Mrs. Whitmore once greeted hers. Except this time, every person who crossed the threshold was equal. In the middle of the gallery, under the chandelier that I had once polished on my knees, stood a red velvet ribbon, the mark of an opening. And beside it, as if history insisted on its symmetry, stood Madeline Whitmore. She arrived exactly 15 minutes late. Always the grand entrance. Her pearls shone, her hair was pinned high. And though her eyes had dulled with time, her presence still carried the same weight. The kind that made rooms pause. The crowd turned to look at her. Whispers followed like static. Someone asked me quietly, "Is that her?" "Yes," I said, without lowering my voice. She walked toward me, heels striking the floor like tiny gavel knocks. "Elena," she said, smiling with all her teeth. "I must admit I'm curious. Quite the spectacle you've created here." "Thank you for coming," I replied. "I was hoping you would." "Of course you were." She looked around. "You always wanted an audience." I met her gaze, calm. "Not for me. For the truth." The photographers moved in, sensing tension. I took the microphone from its stand and turned to the crowd. Clicking everyone. Thank you for being here for the hands that built this house. Tonight's exhibition is not about me. It's about the people who made every home in this city possible. The ones whose names were never engraved on plaques or doorbells. Applause rose, polite but genuine. Madeline clapped too. Slow, deliberate. I continued. Each photograph here captures not only work, but worth. Because a house isn't made of stone or money. It's made of human hands. I paused, then added, and tonight, one house in particular gets to tell its full story. A ripple moved through the crowd. Clara, standing by the projector, gave me a small nod. It was time. Mrs. Whitmore, I said, turning to her, you were once the owner of this home. It seems only fitting that you help me open it again. This time, to everyone. Gasps, flashes, murmurs. I held out the golden scissors. For a moment she froze. Her fingers trembled slightly before she placed them on the handles beside mine. Together, we cut the ribbon. The crowd clapped, the cameras flashed, and the red fabric fell to the floor like a curtain. Thank you, I said softly, stepping aside. Now, please. Everyone, this way. Behind the ribbon stood a tall white curtain. As the lights dimmed, I nodded toward Clara. She pressed a button on the control panel. The curtain began to rise, slow as breath. And there it was, the final photograph. The one I had kept hidden until that moment. It was large, nearly floor to ceiling. In it, Madeline Whitmore stood before her mirror, adjusting her pearls, face turned slightly toward her reflection. Behind her, in the blurred background, a woman was kneeling, wiping the marble floor. That woman was me. The caption beneath read, "No house stands without the invisible hands." The silence that followed was complete. Not one whisper, not one cough, only the faint hum of the chandelier above. Madeline's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no words came. The crowd began to shift, reporters raising their phones, guests leaning closer, flashes popping like sparks. Someone whispered, "That's her. That's the woman who—" Another voice, "Is this real?" I stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Yes," I said quietly, "it's real. That photograph was taken 15 years ago. I didn't take it then. Someone else did. I found the negative while restoring old rolls left behind in this house. It must have been from one of their events." I looked directly at Madeline. I almost threw it away. But when I saw what was in the reflection, her reflection, I realized it told the truth better than any story could. Madeline tried to compose herself. This is an invasion of privacy," she stammered, her voice thin. "No, Mrs. Whitmore. It's an invitation to honesty. For years, you've spoken about grace, reputation, and class. But you built those things on the silence of others. Tonight, that silence ends." She turned to the crowd, desperate. "This woman, she's trying to humiliate me. You all know who she is?" Clara's voice rang from the back. "We do. And we also know what you did." Everyone turned. On the projector behind Madeline, Clara had started the playback of the recording, the room filled with the unmistakable sound of her own voice. "Just make it clean. No traces. Editors will run it. We'll make it elegant." Then the man's voice. "We'll say her studio was funded by dirty money." Finally, her again. I don't want noise. I want confirmation." The words echoed through the room, layered over the image of her frozen face in the photograph. A gasp rippled through the guests. Cameras turned. Reporters whispered into phones. Madeline's hand flew to her mouth. "Turn it off," she shouted. "Turn that off now." But Clara didn't move. Neither did I. I stepped forward once more, my voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Whitmore, 15 years ago you accused me of theft and took away everything I had. Tonight, you've accused me again, only this time you've stolen something larger. My name. But the difference is, I have light now." I gestured toward the photograph. This picture isn't revenge. It's reflection. You see yourself, and behind you, the truth you never wanted to face, the people who made your world possible. I let the words rest in the air. I told you once I wasn't here to steal anything from you. And I still mean it. I'm just returning what was always mine, my image, my story, and my voice. Security moved quietly toward the edges of the room, not for her, but for the press chaos that erupted. Cameras surrounded us. Someone asked, "Mrs. Whitmore, do you have a comment on the recording?" She turned away, head low, pushing through the crowd. As she passed me, she whispered, "You've ruined yourself too." "You'll see," I replied softly. "No. I've finally seen myself." Then she was gone, swallowed by the flashlights and murmurs of 100 curious onlookers. When the noise faded, I looked around. Everywhere people were staring not at me, but at the photograph. At the woman on her knees, the mirror, the invisible hands that built everything. A man in the back started clapping. Then another. Then the whole room. It wasn't loud. It was slow, heavy, deliberate, like a verdict being read. After the applause, Clara joined me on stage. "You all right?" she whispered. I nodded. "More than all right." She smiled. "You know, this might actually change things. The paper wants the story tomorrow morning. All spread." "Good," I said. "Let the truth take its picture." Hours later, when the guests were gone and the lights dimmed, I sat alone in the gallery. The air was thick with the aftertaste of flash powder and perfume. I stared at the final photograph again. In the reflection, my younger self was still kneeling, frozen forever in that act of service. I whispered to her, "It's over now. You can stand up." Outside, the night wind swept through the trees on the hill, carrying faint echoes of voices, laughter, questions, the sound of something ending. I walked to the glass frame that held the bronze key and touched it lightly. It was warm from the lights. I thought of what I'd said earlier. I didn't seek revenge, I sought truth. Now that I had it, I felt lighter, like I'd finally stepped out of someone else's story and back into my own. On the wall opposite, a new reflection shimmered, not of marble or wealth, but of freedom. I turned off the final light, leaving only one small spotlight shining on the photograph. It glowed in the dark, soft but steady, like a candle for every invisible hand that ever built a house, a family, a dream. And as I closed the door behind me, I said to the night, quietly but clearly, "No house stands without the invisible hands. But tonight, those hands finally stand on their own." In the days after the exhibition, the house no longer felt haunted. It breathed differently now. Lighter, freer, almost human. The echoes that once carried orders and whispers had softened into laughter, footsteps, stories. The newspapers called it the Night of Reflection. Clara's article went national. The recording spread like a wildfire. Madeline Whitmore disappeared from Belcrest's social pages. No lawsuits came, no statements, no apologies, just silence. And for the first time, her silence didn't hurt me. It healed me. People began showing up at the mansion, not for photos, but for something else. Women mostly, housekeepers, widows, teachers, nurses. Some timid, some angry, some still carrying shame that didn't belong to them. They came and sat across from me, hands twisting in their laps, eyes full of stories they had never spoken aloud. I realized they weren't coming to be seen. They were coming to see themselves. I started something new. A small workshop at first, 4 chairs, 2 cameras, 1 mirror. I called it Mirror Stories. The rule was simple. No one photographed anyone else. Each woman had to hold the camera, look at her own reflection, and press the shutter when she was ready. No makeup, no posing, just truth. The first day, the women were shy. They giggled, looked away, apologized for their wrinkles. But as they talked, something shifted. One woman, a janitor from a hospital, said softly, "I never liked mirrors. They only showed me what I'd lost." Another replied, "Maybe you were just using the wrong light." We laughed. And slowly, the clicks began. One, then another, then another. the sound of women reclaiming their faces. By the end of the month, mirror stories had grown. We held sessions twice a week. Sometimes we didn't even use cameras, just light, conversation, and reflection. The mansion became a sanctuary, a classroom, a place for memory to turn into meaning. On the wall above the main hall, I installed a small spotlight that shone directly onto the bronze key. It had its own corner now, framed and lit like an artwork. The beam passed through the narrow slot in the frame, splitting into soft rays that scattered across the white wall. Visitors often asked why the light wasn't centered. I told them, because perfection doesn't teach us anything. The cracks do. Sometimes I'd stand there alone after everyone had gone, watching how the light changed with the hours. Gold at dawn, silver by noon, amber in the evening. It reminded me that truth, too, has shades. One afternoon, a young photographer came by. She looked around the studio and said, "It must feel strange, working where everything happened." I smiled. "It feels like coming home to a house I finally own, not on paper but in peace." She nodded and then, quietly, "Do you ever think of her?" "Mrs. Whitmore?" I did. Sometimes. Not with anger anymore, with distance, like a name in an old song. She was the shadow that gave my light its shape. Without her, maybe I would never have learned how to frame my own story. In time, the mansion stopped being known as the Whitmore House. People began calling it the House of Light. Children ran through the gardens again. Artists used the halls for exhibits. Every wall that once held secrets now held stories. Marita still worked with me. Sometimes she'd say, "Do you realize, Elena, you turned a place of accusation into a place of confession?" I'd laugh. Maybe I just fixed the exposure. A year passed. The gossip faded. But mirror stories kept growing. Women from other cities started coming, some flying in just to spend a weekend learning how to take their own portrait. We never advertised. We didn't have to. Word traveled the way truth does, quietly, persistently, from one heart to another. I watched them change through the lens. Their shoulders lifted, their eyes steadied. They left not with printed photos, but with something far rarer. The courage to look at themselves without flinching. One evening, after everyone left, I walked through the empty studio with my camera. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and dust, memory and renewal. I turned the lens toward the mirror we used for the workshops. It was old, chipped at the edges, the silver backing slightly peeling. But when I looked through the viewfinder, I saw the same thing I'd been trying to teach others. Not perfection, but presence. I raised the camera, focused, and pressed the shutter. Click. The flash bounced off the bronze key, scattering light across the room. For a moment, everything shimmered. The mirror, the floor, even the walls seemed alive. I lowered the camera and whispered, "Once I opened doors for others to enter. Now I open the door for myself." That photograph, the one I took of my own reflection that night, hangs near the entrance now. It's the first image people see when they walk in. No caption this time, just light. Visitors sometimes ask who took it. I tell them, "She did," and they always smile, even if they don't quite understand. Because the truth is, I no longer take pictures of people. I help them take pictures back from the world that forgot them. The mansion has new sounds now. The hum of projectors, the laughter of women seeing themselves clearly for the first time, the faint click of shutters echoing like heartbeats. It's not haunted anymore. It's alive. And sometimes, when the evening light spills through the glass, touching the old marble floor I once knelt on, I pause and breathe in deeply. That's when I know. The house and I finally share the same story, rebuilt, reframed, and filled with light. Once, I opened doors for others to walk through. Now, I open the door for myself. A year passed. Seasons turned over the hill and the mansion. The one that once swallowed my life whole became something new. I renamed the studio Second Home. It felt right, because for so long, I'd lived as if I were always standing in someone else's doorway, waiting for permission to belong. Now, at last, I had crossed the threshold. The house was no longer the Whitmores' mansion. It was filled with new sounds. Laughter from my students, the hiss of the espresso machine in the corner, the faint rhythm of music drifting from the speakers. On Saturday mornings, we opened the big windows, and sunlight poured in like forgiveness. I planted herbs on the terrace: mint, rosemary, lavender. The same spot where I used to kneel to scrub the marble until it shone. Now, I watered it barefoot, coffee in one hand, hose in the other. The tiles were still cold, the scent of the soil still the same. Only one thing had changed. It finally belonged to my freedom. Sometimes I pause, looking out over Belcrest Hill. From up there, I could still see the rooftops of the rich, their houses glittering like coins in sunlight. Once, I would have felt small beneath that view. Now, I just felt equal. Light doesn't care who it lands on. People came and went. Artists, journalists, women who found courage in the Mirror Stories program. We'd sit in the sunroom sharing tea and stories. Some were heavy, some tender, but all ended the same way, with a quiet kind of release. One day, a young woman stayed behind after class. She hesitated, then asked, "Miss Elena, do you still hate her? The woman who did all of that to you?" For a moment, I looked at the bronze key on the wall, glowing under its own little spotlight. It looked almost alive now, like a living vein of light. I smiled. "Hate her? No," I said. "I thank her. She swept the weakest version of me right out of this house. If she hadn't, I might still be kneeling on this floor." The girl frowned a little. "That sounds forgiving." I shook my head. "Not forgiving, just free." Sometimes, forgiveness and freedom are not the same thing. Forgiveness still keeps you tied to what happened. Freedom lets you walk past it without looking back. I had chosen freedom. A few months later, a letter arrived by mail. No return address, only neat handwriting on cream paper. It read, "Elena, I saw the article. I suppose you got what you wanted. Leaving Belcrest. I hope you find peace. M." There was no signature beyond the initial, but it was enough. I folded the letter and placed it behind the glass frame of the bronze key. Two relics of the same past, now both pinned to the wall. Proof that neither of them owned me anymore. Life in the second home found its rhythm. On weekdays, the halls filled with the low hum of classes, the click of cameras, laughter, the sound of self-recognition. On weekends, I left the doors open. Neighbors wandered in for coffee, strangers dropped by to look at the photos. The house had become what it was always meant to be, a place where people walked in with doubt and left a little lighter. I even adopted a stray cat that used to sleep by the gate. I named her Lucky. She followed me everywhere, her small paws padding after me as if guarding the space. When the students teased, I told them, "Every house needs someone to watch over it." At night, after everyone left, Lucky would curl on the chair by the window while I reviewed photos from the day. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the dark glass, the outline of a woman with gray hair and gentle eyes. And I would think, "She's finally come home." The garden bloomed again that spring. Lavender spilled over the steps, bees humming lazily in the sun. During one class, a student snapped a picture of me watering the plants and printed it for the wall. In the photo, I'm barefoot, head slightly bent, watering the same tiles where I once scrubbed on my knees. She titled it, "Same Ground, Different Woman." Every time I pass it, I smile. Because it's true. The ground didn't change. The woman did. I started a new ritual. Every Sunday morning, before the students arrived, I would brew strong coffee, sit on the front steps, and write a single line in my notebook. A memory from the old days, rewritten the way I wanted to remember it. Sometimes they were simple. The marble was cold, but I was alive. Other times, they took my key, but not my hands. And once, the house never betrayed me. Only the people who thought they owned it did. After each line, I'd close the notebook and whisper, "Done." Not as closure, but as gratitude. One afternoon, a group of local college students asked if they could interview me for a project on women entrepreneurs. I said yes. They sat in a circle, recorders on the floor, notebooks open. One asked, What's the most important lesson you learned from all this? I thought for a moment before answering. That houses are like people, I said. They can hold darkness for years, but if you open the windows long enough, the light wins. Another asked, do you ever wish things had gone differently? I smiled. No. I just wish I'd known sooner that my story didn't end where someone else stopped believing in me. They wrote in silence after that. When they left, one of them hugged me and whispered, thank you for showing us what surviving looks like. I told her, it's not surviving. It's starting over, with the same heart, but a different light. That night, I stood on the balcony, watching the city lights below. The same view I used to see from the kitchen window when I washed the dishes. But now, it was mine to enjoy. The air smelled of lavender and coffee. The moonlight touched the bronze key through the glass and made it gleam. And I thought, maybe freedom isn't a place you arrive at. Maybe it's the way you walk. Steady, unafraid, unchained by anyone's permission. Sometimes, women still ask if I'll ever move out of the mansion. I always tell them, maybe one day. But not because I need to leave, only because I'm ready to begin somewhere else. Because this house, this second home, isn't about ownership anymore. It's about reclamation. I didn't buy it to prove a point. I bought it to prove I could create peace where pain once lived. The last photo I ever took inside the mansion was unplanned. It was early morning. The sun had just risen, and light was streaming through the stained glass window in the hallway. I stood there, barefoot again, the cat weaving between my legs. I lifted the camera and clicked. One simple frame. The bronze key glowing on the wall, the beam of sunlight passing through it, casting tiny golden shapes across the floor. When I developed the photo later, I noticed something strange. The light formed a small, perfect outline of a doorway on the tiles. For a second, it looked like the house itself was opening a door for me. And I laughed, a full, unguarded laugh that echoed through every corner. The same corners where I once whispered apologies for existing. Now, when I walk through the halls, I sometimes talk to the walls, to the floors, to the light. I say thank you. For remembering me, for keeping me long enough to let me return as myself. Because that's what freedom feels like. Not revenge, not triumph. Just stillness, without fear. Every evening before closing, I walk to the wall where the bronze key hangs. I turn off every other light, leaving only that one small spotlight on it. The beam cuts through the metal, splits in two, and dances softly on the white wall behind it. It's never exactly the same pattern twice. It moves with the air, the hour, the earth's turning. I stand there and whisper, once, I opened doors for others to walk through. Now, I open the door for myself. Then I lock up, turn the key in my hand, not to shut the world out, but to keep the light in. And that's how the story ends. Or maybe, how it finally begins. The camera light blinked red. Clara stood behind the lens, giving me a small nod. It was our last interview, a short documentary about second home, about everything that had happened since that night. I sat in the same sunlit room where I once scrubbed the floors 15 years ago. Now there were potted plants by the window, photos on the walls, the smell of coffee and lavender in the air. The bronze key glowed softly behind me, catching the light. Clara said, "Ready when you are." I took a breath and looked straight into the camera. I used to believe that once you were thrown out of a place, you lost your right to ever go back, I said, voice steady. But I learned something different. I smiled a little. If one day you find yourself locked out of a home, a job, a dream, a life, don't spend your years knocking on the same door. Just build another entrance. And when you walk back in, let it be with your head high, your hands steady, and your name still yours. The room was quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the lights, the soft ticking of the clock above the door. Outside, someone was laughing in the garden. I continued, gently. I know what it feels like to kneel on cold floors, to give your best, and still be treated as if you were invisible. But I also know this. Invisibility isn't the end. It's just the dark room where the photograph of who you really are starts to develop. I paused. You can step out again with light that's finally yours. For a moment, I let the silence sit. Then I added, don't be afraid to clean your old memories. Sometimes, the dust you wipe away isn't shame, it's the beginning of clarity. Sometimes, the stains you've tried to hide are the very proof that you lived, that you worked, that you survived. I could feel my throat tighten, but my voice didn't shake. Maybe that's why I still love the smell of polish, the sound of cloth on glass. Because every act of cleaning is also an act of reclaiming, saying, I leaned forward slightly, eyes still on the lens. If there's someone out there watching this, someone who's been told she doesn't belong, who's been silenced or erased, I want you to know, you don't need permission to begin again. You don't need anyone's key. My lips curved into a faint smile. Your freedom isn't waiting inside someone else's door. It's been in your hands all along. Clara lowered the camera slowly, but I wasn't done. I lifted my gaze again, a little brighter this time. I came back to this house thinking I needed to prove something. But the truth is, I didn't come back for revenge. I came back to turn the house into light. I looked around. At the walls, at the mirror, at the key. And maybe that's what we all need to do, in our own way. Turn the places that broke us into places that shine. Clara whispered, that's beautiful. One last line? I nodded, then looked straight into the lens again, as if speaking to one person. The way I wished someone had spoken to me all those years ago. If one day, I said softly, you're thrown out of the place you once called home, remember this, you can always return, just standing differently. A pause. Don't be afraid to wipe the dust off your past. Because sometimes, that's the brightest light you'll ever photograph your freedom in. Clara smiled behind the camera, her eyes misting. That's the perfect ending, she whispered. But I wasn't sure it was an ending. I turned toward the bronze key glowing on the wall, its light spilling softly onto the floor, and said one last thing. Not for the camera, but for myself. My story closes here, but maybe, just maybe, this is the first frame of your freedom.